The Great War started and ended on Saturday, October 23rd, 2077, when nuclear weapons were launched by all the nuclear-capable nations of the Fallout world, mainly the United States, China, and the USSR. The exchange lasted for approximately 2 hours, according to most survivors' accounts. Once the last atomic bomb and nuclear warhead had fallen, the world fell into the deep darkness of a nuclear holocaust, resulting in the majority of human civilization crumbling across the planet. The geopolitical situation that led into this catastrophe was built on the fact that there was an enormous shortage of resources in the world of Fallout. The impressive technologies that were created in this world were huge, but I don't mean in scope, I mean in literal scale. Every piece of technology created in this world was just big, at least bigger by conventional standards when compared to the type of technology that we have in the real world. A cell phone in the real world can be fueled by small batteries that can last for days on a single charge, a charge that is not particularly expensive to produce, really just a small amount of electricity. In the Fallout world, computers literally require fusion cores to run, and when you look at the closest comparison to a cell phone in this world, you get the Pip-Boy, which is just a massive hindrance of an artifact which consumes tons and tons of energy to run. The fact that every piece of technology in the world of Fallout requires exorbitant amounts of energy meant that by the year 2050, resources started to run out altogether. This was what started it all, what was then known as the Resource Wars. The Middle East jacked up the price of oil to ridiculous levels, which caused the European Commonwealth to take military action in that region. This caused a nuclear exchange to happen between terrorists that had gotten their hands on nukes and the Commonwealth. Keep in mind that no nuclear exchange had actually happened since World War II, but now things were unraveling. The fact that nukes had been thrown out and that the United Nations had failed at keeping the peace resulted in many of its members to start pulling out, to the point where in 2052 the United Nations was completely disbanded. With no United Nations to attempt to hold the world together, tensions between all the major countries started to form, most of it focused in Alaska of all places. You see, the United States had found a sizable oil deposit in Alaska, which it started to unilaterally exploit as one would. However, as the world found itself embroiled by lack of resources, war started to break out, as most nations started going bankrupt as their economies collapsed due to the shortages. The Chinese ended up invading Alaska in 2066 in pursuit of the state's remaining oil reserves, and for the next 10 years, the two countries would duke it out in warfare without a clear winner. The United States, however, had an ace in their hole: mechanized infantry that they started to deploy by the end of the war, what you might recognize as power armor. With the help of this technology and with a massive invasion of mainland China, the United States managed to produce enough pressure to push back the Chinese from Alaska and claim the territory once again for the US. In order to secure the Alaskan front from any future attacks, the US actually militarily annexed Canada, in spite of massive protests in the country. Tons and tons of wartime rioting, anti-war civil disobedience, and a scary amount of military desertion was prevalent during this time. But the federal government acted aggressively against its own citizens and its allies in order to secure Alaska, the very last untapped oil reserve in the world. These events marked the end of the Resource Wars and started what would then become the Great War. It is not actually known who launched the first nuclear weapon. President Richardson would say that China launched first, but whether or not he was lying is unclear. Many speculate that the higher-ups from Vault-Tec might have actually launched the first nuke in order to produce the anarchy that would allow their sick experiments to start. The only information that we have is from the United States side. It tells us that during midnight of the last day, 3 Chinese nuclear submarines were spotted just off the California coastline. At 3:37 a.m. of the last day, US Air Force spotted a squadron of unknown aircrafts at high altitude off the Bering Straits of Alaska. At 9:13 a.m., the Integrated Operational Nuclear Detection System detected 4 probable nuclear missile launches, at which point DEFCON 2 was declared. Only 4 minutes later, the North American Aerospace Defense Command confirmed nuclear missile launches and bombers loaded with nuclear ordnance, which promptly caused the US to go into DEFCON 1. Only 9 minutes later, at 9:26 a.m., Response Scenario Protocol MXCN-91 was enacted by the President, authorizing the immediate launch of US nuclear weapons. Nuclear strikes on the states of New York and Pennsylvania were confirmed at 9:42, with nuclear strikes in Massachusetts and Washington occurring only 5 minutes later. The nuclear exchange that characterized the Great War lasted for only a brief 2 hours, but was unbelievably destructive and reshaped the climate of the world, even as it caused the fall of most of human civilization everywhere across the globe. More energy was released in the first moments of the Great War than all of the previous human conflicts in the history of the world combined. Entire mountain ranges were created as the ground buckled and moved under the strain of the cataclysmic pressure produced by numerous concentrated atomic explosions. Rivers and oceans around the world were contaminated with the resulting radioactive fallout released by the nuclear weapons by all sides, and climate changed horrifically. All the regions of the Earth suffered from a single permanent season once the initial dust blasted into the atmosphere by the nuclear explosions had settled. A scorching radioactive desert summer. Many did not heed the air raid sirens that fateful day. Many vaults sealed their doors as Earth burned in atomic fire. Some sought refuge where they could, be they in sewers, subway stations, drainage shelters, or even basements. Unfortunately though, without a strong outer shield of dense metal or rock to protect them from both the heat and the kinetic shock, very few civilians survived the full-out nuclear exchange. The radiation turned a few into what we now call ghouls, or necrotic post-humans, decrepit, rotting zombie-like mutants. Many of them whose minds were destroyed by the radiation turned feral, behaving pretty much like a zombie would. Others, however, retaining their previous self and even going so far as to form communities where they live and thrive. About a week after the detonations, rain started to fall. This rain, however, was not drinkable as it was tainted with soot, ash, and radioactive elements produced by the explosions. Some of the ghouls that were alive pre-war claimed the rain was black for a full 4 days. The very start of the terrible fallout that marked the true and permanent destruction caused by the Great War. Many of the animals, plants, and microorganisms that had survived the explosions died because of the rain, and those that survived it were cursed to live in a world barren from life. Despite the global destruction caused by the war, many areas remained habitable, with low and tolerable levels of radioactive fallout. The surviving humans in those parts of Earth were able to continue living in the ruins of the pre-war civilization, establishing new communities and even small cities. It was then, 20 years later, when the first vaults started to open, and the world needed to start anew once again. Hey guys, this video restarts my efforts into doing some Fallout content that I have been wanting to do for some time now. I hope you all enjoyed it, and I look forward to some more in the future. But first I would like to say that thanks to people like Alexander Bryson, Dylan Baker, and Alex Fitchy, I am able to do these videos in the first place. YouTube is extremely volatile right now, and I am in need of expanding my efforts into Patreon to make sure that I can keep all of this afloat. So thank you all that have helped me out in patreon.com/MrRhexx, and hope to see more of you there in the future.